Hello there guys, happy Monday if there is such a thing. I'm Daniel Childs, welcome back to the show. It is Monday, added time. I'm going to be answering your questions that you submitted via X at SonOfChelsea and also on my YouTube community page as ever. And also the final international break till spring of 2024. So that is something to be a little bit optimistic about. We just hope that we can get to Newcastle without any more injuries given some of the horrendous pitch conditions I'm seeing for some of these internationals. I mean, I'm just praying. But there is that. For the rest of the week, we're going to have content building up to that Newcastle game. We're going to have a breakdown show tomorrow where we're going to be talking about Chelsea's recent performances in terms of the return of a certain Christopher Nkunku and where he fits in within this Chelsea team for Mauricio Pochettino when he does return, which could be as early as Saturday. And then hopefully in terms of actually previewing the Newcastle game, going to have a good guest from a Newcastle point of view. And then I'll give you my team selector and thoughts ahead of that game on Saturday at St James's Park. So if you like the sound of that as a Chelsea fan who wants to see more Chelsea content, please do hit that like button. Really helps the show out. It's free to do. And if you haven't already, which I also suggest, it's free to do, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on, and share the content around if you are listening on the podcast. Thank you as well for tuning in. But let's get into your questions. And I don't think there is a better place to start than, of course, the point deductions to Everton. We spoke about this last week in terms of Roman Abramovich, that story from The Guardian that was reported widely. And basically the aftermath of that Everton punishment from the Premier League and how will it impact both Manchester City and Chelsea in the future. There's a lot of baying for blood, especially from rival fans who want to see both Chelsea and Manchester City get relegated. Will they actually get relegated? So these are the two questions, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the situation. Firstly, this is from Draw or Over 2. Is this point deduction thing for real? And then Top Toes 93 asks, what's the likely outcome if Chelsea get punished over the current financial situation going on, in your opinion? So it did feel very March 2022 on Friday evening when I was seeing headlines saying that Chelsea were going to be relegated. Funny enough, by the sort of people who are writing identical headlines in March of 2022. And we know what happened there. Chelsea didn't get relegated. We're actually fine as a club. Didn't cease into some black hole and was never to be seen again, which, you know, I do think there are some maybe out there, and I'm not just saying rival fans. I think there are some people who would have preferred to see that happen in March of 2022, but that didn't happen. So are we heading down a similar doomsday route? And this is not a nice answer. This is not a simple answer, but the honest answer I have, based on all the information I've taken in from reporters, from, you know, the way that Everton situation was handled by the Premier League, it's hard to know. And as David Ornstein, I think, brought up quite well on Friday, actually, when he was asked about Man City, Chelsea, which is a lot of what a lot of people want to know in terms of consistency. He said, you know, it's all right to go down conspiracy theory routes in terms of why Chelsea and City may go off light compared to Everton. But he did stress these are different cases, and the idea that they are going to be punished in the same way or investigated in the same way or come to the same conclusion is probably not accurate. So the idea that Chelsea would get the exact same punishment if they're found guilty as Everton might be not accurate. You know, Chelsea may go down a route as we did with FIFA a couple of years ago where we get a transfer ban. I could see that happening if it's maybe related to a breach in FFP rather than a points deduction. There is a lot that goes into this just beyond Chelsea. I mean, there is the independent regulator that was sort of pushed through and promoted after the Super League. I personally do vouch and think that an independent regulator in this game is absolutely needed. Whether that means Chelsea get more punishment or not, I think it is absolutely valid we have an independent regulator. And I do think some of this maybe is the Premier League trying to save its own skin and trying to prove that they can be a little bit vigilant over their league. But there also is, as I alluded to last week, with all of this, I'm not sure who it was who said, you know, this is very much going to be the next decade of the Premier League. Legal battles, allegations. There is, I could see this opening up a can of worms that maybe some who are cheering on these potential charges right now won't be that happy in a few years' time, because the football world is not so black and white, is what I'll say. I think it is a grey world. And that isn't to say that we don't have any rules and we just allow the Wild West and we allow a situation where anyone can do anything. But, you know, given the way certain ownership has been pushed through in recent years. You can go back to Roman Abramovich in 2003 coming into Chelsea. You can look at the Man City takeover. You can look at the Newcastle takeover, which was as recent as 2021. There is a lot here that I think the Premier League is not exactly innocent in themselves. So this is going to play out, and I think in a very complex way, and probably I think a delayed way as well, as we've seen with Man City. 115 charges, and there hasn't been much done since. Basically, it feels like this is something that's going to be run. It feels like something that's going to run on, and how that actually impacts Chelsea, whether it's a point deduction, relegation, which is the most extreme. Actually, another point here. I think a lot of people were saying Chelsea, Man City, as if Chelsea got fined and charged, basically accused of 115 breaches, basically at the same time. That's not what has happened. So to try and claim again, as David Ornstein pointed out, that both of these cases are identical is also just a little bit simplistic. Moving on to some other questions here. This is from Tristan. Given Chelsea men are spending huge amounts on both senior players and younger potential players, how do academy players see their way into the first team, given that there is also a path for them? We did touch on this when I was speaking about Conor Gallagher's contract situation and the concerns over that. Please go and watch that show last week. This is something that is going to create a friction point, and I think it already has. We keep on recruiting players with the idea and I guess the intention of bringing them back when you are buying players of, say, the age of 16, 17. And even if they are playing senior football elsewhere and maybe they aren't going to make their way to Chelsea in sort of the senior setup till several years down the line, what does that mean for those of a similar age bracket at Cobham right now? It sounds very strong, but a bit of a disgrace really if they allow Cobham again to kind of fall back into the wilderness in terms of players actually making it into the first team. Because look at recent years, Mason Mount, Reece James, I'll still throw Tammy Abraham into that. Right now, who is Chelsea's best player right now? And the majority of, I think, fans have agreed, who is that player? It's Conor Gallagher, another player produced through the Cobham system. Trevor Chalobah is another one that's come through the system, and I think we'll get quite a good move in January when he does leave Chelsea. So I just personally am of the belief that Cobham still needs to be valued properly. It still needs to be treated seriously, and it's not that there can't be talents brought in from elsewhere. I've always been of the belief if you are going to do that and spend money, they've got to be top caliber, because then if you're spending money on players who actually aren't of that level, that you could have actually saved money and invested in, young players coming through your academy to maybe fill some squad roles like a Trevor Chalobah and Conor Gallagher have in recent years, or you have someone of the quality of Reece James who is world-class level. I think that's worth it personally, and I do think there is a problem there. Even some of the players we bought over the past year, there's a question about a certain player who we didn't. It hasn't even been at Chelsea a year, and he's already maybe fallen by the wayside because of how scattered some of it feels. So I absolutely understand the concern. Ollie asks, what's going to happen after Emma Hayes? What are your up-to-date expectations for our season? Top 4, Europe, a cup or 2? In terms of Emma Hayes, it's a very difficult question to answer, because as we saw, the best reference point is Alex Ferguson, right? Created a dynasty at Manchester United, and it's very difficult to fill the vacuum of such a massive personality. Like, this is not just a coach who's done well. This is someone who has led, spearheaded, very much created the environment that is Chelsea, and it's been so successful. The relationships, the deep relationships he's had with those players, I think emotionally it's going to be very difficult for some of those players to move on. Some of those are still young players, some of those are still developing. Like Lauren James is a wonderful talent, but she still has years to go, as well as others in that team, some of whom very much, give Emma Hayes credit for maybe their careers and give so much weight and gratitude to their development as players on the club and also international stage because of playing for Chelsea. So who that figure is it's going to be a massive test in terms of recruiting someone. And I would like to think that investment isn't going to stop anytime soon. But, just having the investment, as the men's side knows very well, doesn't automatically mean success. It doesn't mean that you're just going to easily walk your way to another WSL title. And I do think that Emma Hayes, there will be, it sounds very dramatic, and I'm just trying to think of a better word for it. Hangover, or just, I think grieving process of losing Emma Hayes at Chelsea, because she has been so integral. I know that was a very long answer. I mean, in terms of my expectations, I still think Chelsea can get European football this year. And in terms of a cup, I think we should be targeting both, right? Because we don't have European football. So I think both should be on the table for Chelsea to try and go the distance in those competitions. Matt H3846 asks, is it time to move on from Chilwell? And do we need to go out and get a replacement? Seems like the team's evolved and he's been left behind. I'm not sure I agree with that. You know, the level of Ben Chilwell's performances, especially at the start of the season, I thought was still very high. And I felt that, you know, he would, if he stayed fit, I think he would have been first choice along with Reece James. There is absolutely a valid concern over his and Reece James' continued injury problems, right? If you can't have a player fit for the majority of the season, they become a problem and they can't be deemed, I say this about any player, you can't deem them a vital player. And Cucurella has taken the opportunity, and it's wonderful to see, because when you have a player like Chilwell go down, you want someone to step up. Marc Cucurella has stepped up, to the shock of basically all of us. You hope that continues. But I don't think now that means that Ben Chilwell has no future at Chelsea and we just need to move on from him. I don't see how Ben Chilwell's attributes, especially the way he's able to run behind, his athleticism, I think his defensive quality we've seen over the years at Chelsea, means that he's now irrelevant to the team. The team has passed him by. I think when he returns, hopefully in the new year at this point, he will quickly reclaim that place. That's at least my opinion. I do accept, coming from a biased point, is that I like Ben Chilwell. He's one of my favourite players, but I think it's a little bit too extreme to say he's been left behind, in my opinion. And finally, K Bringer here asks, what should we do with Madueke? It feels as if he's out with Poch, and I don't see him getting minutes anytime soon. It's interesting you ask this question, because I've seen some discourse online about it, in terms of looking at some of his data from the back end of last season, where Chelsea were obviously horrendous, and he actually put up some good numbers. And he hasn't had a consistent run in the team so far this season. He did have an injury that he needed to recover from. So my thing with Noni Madueke, I think he is a very talented player. I think whether it's a coach thing, it could very well be a coach thing of preference, or just the fact that you have players in form that have taken those roles very quickly. You know, you've got to take into consideration Raheem Sterling's form so far this season, Cole Palmer, how quickly he's integrated into life at Chelsea and become a valuable player. The fact we've moved more to a 4-3-3, or at least have a third central midfielder in Conor Gallagher. Conor Gallagher has to be in the Chelsea team week in, week out, because he's that good and influential. So, you know, that takes away a potential spot for Noni Madueke. And also, I just think it's the recruitment strategy of buying a lot of players in a quick period of time. And some of those potentially, you know, because it's so cluttered in a certain area of the pitch, and Chelsea don't have as many games this season because of no European football, the opportunities for Noni aren't as present and, you know, regular as they could have been last season. And I do think there is a very talented player within there. What I would say for people doubting Noni Madueke is, if you were upset by the doubting of Mykhailo Mudryk because he didn't have a lot of football under his belt, and you were like, until we see him in the first team regularly, we can't make a firm judgment. I think a similar logic has to be applied surely with Noni Madueke. Until we see him get a regular run in the team, if he's able to, then you make the firm judgment. I can't make a firm judgment on whether Noni Madueke is good enough for Chelsea. I think based on what I've seen, I think it's very promising, and I think whether he makes it at Chelsea or not, I do think he will make a very decent Premier League player somewhere. But at the moment, it's if the team keeps on playing well, and now you've got Christopher Nkunku returning, and we hope this is the hope, but maybe not if you're Noni Madueke, if you're not a fringe player. If you are a fringe player, you kind of don't want there to be a full deck to play with, and Chelsea are winning week in, week out, because that's probably not good for your development. And maybe there will be an assessment mid-season if he's barely played. But then you always throw up those, alternative timelines, basically, or just the idea, as we've seen with the players like Marc Cucurella, who suddenly find their way into the first team. So you can never rule them out, but Noni Madueke, I think, is very talented. And until we see him in the first team, will he get that run? We'll wait and see, but I could absolutely grasp why some people are concerned. Maybe some people are already writing him off, which I don't agree with. But then also for the player, why he may be looking at the situation already and going, am I going to get into this team? I think that's a fair concern. You can check out more content right now. Follow me across the socials at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.